Kia ora, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asim Mukhtar. I'm Vice President of Pakistan Association of New Zealand, and you're watching Power Hour Live with Pans. Following the latest development of COVID-19, Pans decided to start a Facebook Live informative talk show with government representatives, professionals, including healthcare, commerce, and representatives from the government, and obviously the community leaders. And this is a program where we have actually asked a friend of us, a very kind person, Priyanca Radhakrishnan, who is a parliamentary secretary for ethnic communities and list MP tonight. She was a key personnel or key person who have actually played her role in repatriating Indians from India. So it is very important show tonight because we would like to talk about the stranded Pakistanis. Just to let you know, there are almost 70 to 80 people are stranded in Pakistan, and they are looking towards the government and MFAT to actually repatriate them from that. We have Priyanca Radhakrishnan with us tonight. I would to invite her on the screen. She will be with us in a minute. Very warm welcome to you, Priyanka, in today's live streaming, which will be viewed by thousands of our followers across the New Zealand and countries.
Thanks so much, Asim. Assalamu alaikum to you and to all our viewers, and Ramadan Kareem as well.
Thank you very much, and Ramadan Kareem to you. And yes, obviously, it is the second day of Ramadan today in New Zealand, and many people have just finished their breakfast, and they might be have finished their Isha prayer as well. So thank you very much for joining us. Obviously, it is a pleasure and honor for us to host you.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be on your show. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And let's kickstart our program tonight. And obviously, let's go straight to the COVID-19 and its after effects. And let's talk about the implications. So can you please describe specific initiatives and steps taken by Labour government to deal with COVID-19 pandemic and its implications on specifically on ethnic communities?
Yeah, sure. There've been a fair few initiatives, as colleagues of mine have pointed out on the show over the last few weeks. So I will touch on them, and I'll go into a little bit more detail into the specific aspects that disproportionately affect our communities, ethnic communities. But basically, I'll just draw our attention to a question that was asked of our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, right at the start when COVID was confirmed here in New Zealand. And I think it was a press gallery reporter who asked her if she was afraid. And her response was no, because the government has a plan and will be, executing that plan in coming weeks to ensure that at that point, it was to contain the virus and to stop its spread here in New Zealand. And so that's what we've seen over the last 4 years. We've seen a plan that has been rolled out, decisive action that was taken, and the government's number one priority was to protect the health of New Zealanders and to cushion the economy from the blow that COVID, we knew COVID would have both globally and obviously here domestically in New Zealand as well. And so the plan was to go hard and to go early. And that's why very soon the borders were shut, because international travel was and still is one of the top risks for the spread of COVID here in New Zealand. But also we went into a complete lockdown quite quickly. Also, one of the first things that the government did was to roll out the economic response package, which was and still is an incredibly significant package for New Zealanders, and actually one of the largest in the world given the size of our economy as well. I think from memory, the only other one that was comparable at the time was Canada. And so, of course, just very quickly, the wage subsidy scheme was a significant part of that economic response package, very relevant to ethnic communities as well, because so many within our communities are small business owners. And the wage subsidy scheme was specifically to provide some support and certainty to businesses, viable businesses, and also to ensure that workers had some income over this period of time. Because, those who run businesses will know that with a little bit of, a little bit of support, a little bit of certainty, you can tide over some some adversities when they hit you, and we knew that this one, COVID, would be a significant one. And then, of course, we've seen, the cap, subsequently, the cap was removed so that even larger businesses could apply for that too. So a 12-week period to ensure that their workers would have some income, preferably the full amount of their pre-COVID income, if not 80% as a minimum. And then those who really can't, the full value of the wage subsidy. Specifically, there was no sort of restriction put on that for migrant workers. It includes migrant workers as well. But of course, it's up to the employers to apply for the scheme. The Business Finance Guarantee Scheme, where about 80% of loans are backed by the government for eligible businesses. There's also a tool that I just wanted to highlight to people. I've realized in engagement with our communities that many aren't aware that on the business, I think it's business.govt.nz, there's a tool that's been set up it's called the Kiwi Business Boost tool, and it actually gives, if employers or employees, also contractors and sole traders, if they jump on that website and look for this tool, there's a huge amount of information that can be tailored to the different situations that people are in. So to give small businesses a little bit of guidance through this COVID period, but also beyond. So there's that as well. Of course, the protections for renters and tenants that was put in place, the mortgage repayment deferral scheme. So that economic package has been pretty significant. Of course, that doesn't cover everyone. I know that businesses, for example, have been asking for a bit more support when it comes to commercial rents. And that I understand there is a bill that is in train that will go to Parliament when Parliament begins to sit, which is in Alert Level 3. So that should be coming up reasonably soon. Now, the other thing that I wanted to point to, so this is part of the support that has been provided by government to particularly to businesses, employers and employees in New Zealand. There's also been a boost to social services. It was a $27 million boost that was given to registered charities and so on. And that is to ensure that nobody goes without food or accommodation during this period. Of course, when we're asking people to self-isolate, we need to make sure that everyone is able to access essential necessities of life, basically. That's why essential services were allowed to open at Alert Level 4. But that's also why our NGOs and charities have had a significant funding boost so that food parcels and packages could be given out to those who needed them. Again, that was available to everyone, regardless of their immigration status as well. For that specific accommodation support, it's through MB. And so people can jump on the MB website in case they need to avail of that. Okay. The other point that I'd like to make, so there are different aspects in terms of the support that's been put in place, the guidance, the alert level system that the government put out right at the start was to give people a little bit of certainty during this time so that they know what to expect from government and that they know what is expected of them as well. That's been communicated clearly every day by the Prime Minister and relevant ministers and also the Director General of Health through the press stand-ups that I'm sure you're aware of as well. And so I think the fact that we've come this far and managed to flatten the curve is both the role of the government, but equally the role that the team of 5 million in New Zealand have played. So at this point, just a big shout out to everyone across our communities who've been staying home and saving lives through this whole period. Now, very quickly, to answer specifically the point that you asked me around ethnic communities, of course, all of this, ensuring, that there's more testing, there's more contact tracing available, looking out for the health of everyone, that affects our communities as well. The support that's given through the economic response package and the social support that's been provided, that affects us also. But also you'll see that the Office of Ethnic Communities has played an incredible role over the last 4 years in ensuring that those messages have been translated into a number of different languages. The Minister made a call to realign the priorities of the Ethnic Communities Development Fund. And I know that you had the Honourable Jenny Salesa, the Minister for Ethnic Communities, on earlier this week as well. Yes. And so she made the decision to realign. Firstly, of course, there was a significant boost to that fund that was, I think it was 520,000 for
Yeah,
the last
something from
15 years
there
or
to
something like
4.2
that.
million. Yes.
That's right. So
Yeah, that's
huge
almost
boost to
triple.
that
Yeah.
funding to support our communities for the first time in a long time. And then she's realigned the priorities to ensure that there's support for alternative means for ethnic communities to stay socially connected during this time, to support employment initiatives that come from the community, and also to support efforts that go towards community resilience and recovery. Because of course, we're transitioning soon into alert level 3.
Yeah.
But it doesn't end there. We still need to be vigilant there, and it's a long road towards recovery. So to ensure that our communities are supported through that as well, there was a realignment of the priorities for that funding. I also know that there have been communities from different ethnic groups that have applied for funding through the ECDF to also provide things like food grants to those on temporary visas from their community. So those sorts of support from the office and from the minister specifically as well.
Thank you very much. And that was a very comprehensive answer to my question. And I hope that has actually cleared lots of doubts. And especially people are talking about the business subsidies and all that. And you have given the answer about that. We will obviously will ask another question in detail about the business subsidies or business support packages from the Labour government. And I must admire and commend the leadership of Jacinda Ardern, how she brilliantly actually handled this situation with the team of very competent people like you. And we can easily say that we are probably the safest country in the world. How do you feel being a safest or the second safest country in the world?
Look, as I said at the start, the Prime Minister and our cabinet had a very definitive plan. They took some very strong action that was needed at the start, and it was based on health advice, advice that the Prime Minister got from her chief science advisor, but also a whole network of global science advisors and public health experts. Because, of course, this is not something that any of us, definitely not in our lifetimes, have gone through. So it is unprecedented. And so at the start of that whole process, it would have been difficult to know, how it's going to transpire. And that's why basing decisions completely on health experts was the right thing to do at that point. So I'm incredibly proud. I'm proud of our government, the way that they have led the decision making around this and taken health and based the plan on health advice, and knowing from the start that our small businesses will need some support through this period, and making sure that very quickly that support was provided. And at the end of the day, the plan was one that was right for our country and for our people, and to protect New Zealanders. So yeah, I read the international commentary like everybody else. I see what the government is doing, and I'm incredibly proud of where we've come. But also, as I said previously, it's the entire nation that has come together and followed those guidelines, because if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here today. And our communities have played a huge role in that.
Absolutely. And we are obviously very proud that we were a part of this whole campaign and we actually followed our leader. And I was other day thinking that maybe in 20, 30 years, we will be telling very proudly to our grandkids that this has happened to us 30 years ago. And one of the leaders stood and asked us to stay at home for a month. And we all stayed at home for a month without. So that is some stories we will actually be able to tell our grandkids in 30 years.
Yeah.
Just another question. Why was it necessary to extend a lockdown 4 for another week? Why couldn't we have actually moved to lockdown 3 a week before? And do you think that the lockdown 3 will only stay for 2 weeks, or are we going to see another extension in lockdown 3?
So to your first question, it was really an addition of 2 working days to the, the initial lockdown period of 4 weeks would have ended at midnight on Wednesday. So it was really the addition of 2 business days to that initial period that was set. And what Cabinet had to weigh up was the cost of not reopening for those 2 days versus the gains that would be made of remaining at alert level 4. And the decision and the public health advice that was provided was that the gains that we would reap from making that decision was worth it. So it wasn't one that would have been taken lightly. Of course, I can only speculate as I'm not sitting at that table. But from what I know, it will not have been a decision that was taken lightly. The Prime Minister and her cabinet were well aware of the fact that they were asking New Zealanders not to open their businesses for another 2 working days. But the gains of that outweighed the gains from a public health point of view. And also just to emphasize it once again that, transitioning into alert level 3 doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. We
Yeah.
still have to stay vigilant at that point. It is an opportunity to slowly open up the economy a little bit to ensure that more businesses can open in a way that is safe. So physical distancing, hygiene requirements being adhered to, and so on and so forth. But from a social point of view, there's not a huge amount of change. We get to expand the bubble a little bit to maybe take in elderly parents. I've heard of people, whose parents are living alone and they'd like to extend their bubble to include them. That's okay. But it's still, the analogy that's used is that we're still in a recovery room phase. So we still need to be cautious. We need to be incredibly careful because in alert level 2, however long that may be, and I'll get to your second part of your question very shortly, but till we get to the next level down, alert level 2, we need to be very, very careful. And I can't stress that enough, because if we're not, then we won't be maximizing the gains that we've collectively made so far. Now, how long we're going to remain in alert level 3? What we know is so far it's been a period of 2 weeks, but that will be reassessed by the Prime Minister, by her health advisors and cabinet. And, you'll forgive me for not being able to predict what's going to happen, because day to day, COVID has been teaching us new things, and things have
Absolutely.
been, the environment changes quickly. So
Absolutely.
we're still monitoring the situation, and the Prime Minister and her advisors will continue to do so.
There are two connected questions to this explanation. We have seen relapse of this virus in Singapore, and there are few reports in China as well. So, if we have that relapse in New Zealand, what is the plan for the government? The other thing is, I was actually watching a report from Czech Republic the other day. Czech Republic is actually sandwiched between, you can say, kind of sandwiched between Italy, Germany, and France. And you know that Italy, Germany, and France has more than 20,000 deaths. Whereas if you study the Czech Republic, there are very few cases and less number of deaths. And the thing which they are following is it's religiously they're following that everybody has to wear masks when they are going out. Is government thinking of making it a compulsory PPE for everybody to go out while wearing masks? Because obviously, if I have the coronavirus, if I have to sneeze, I will be sneezing in my mask instead of sneezing in the air. So it will reduce the droplets. Two questions: relapse. If it relapse, will we be going back to level 4? And are we thinking of anything out of the box to actually implement in this country?
Yeah. So to your first question around the relapse, you'll be aware that the focus of the government now is no longer containment of the virus, but it's elimination. And that,
Elimination.
yeah. So elimination doesn't mean 0 cases, though. It means 0 tolerance for the cases. So what that means is, and you would have seen over the last 4 or 5 weeks, or however long it's been, that cases generally come up in clusters. So either clusters that are geographical, or because of someone who's traveled overseas and come back, and so on and so forth. So the focus on elimination from a health perspective means that the minute there's a case that comes up, before it spreads, and you'll remember that we haven't had a higher rate of community transmission, because the way in which this is being dealt with from a health point of view is to stamp it out. The minute there's a confirmed case, contact tracing, testing is done. If it's positive, contact tracing is done, so that the person then identifies, where they've been, who they've been with. Those people are contacted, and so the spread is contained that way. They're self-isolated till the symptoms, they're not symptomatic anymore, or if they need to go into hospital, that happens at that point. And so that constant testing and contact tracing and self-isolation, if that's done vigilantly, that's the way that you will get to elimination, which is to keep stamping it out. So it won't be, that's important to note, because otherwise when we think elimination, we tend to think, oh, we're never going to get cases again. that's not feasible. But if we have a plan to stamp it out as and when they come up, then you won't see the widespread community transmission that many other countries have seen. That's been the plan, a part of the plan, and that's worked so far. So if that's the case, then we try and avoid going back, because of course the last thing anyone wants is to yo-yo between alert levels. That's why we're being careful now, because we don't want to go back into alert level 4 and a complete lockdown, because that's not good for anybody. But in saying that, if there is a possibility always to move between alert levels, and if that needs to be done to keep us safe as a nation, then I suppose that is a decision for Cabinet to make. But I know that as far as possible, the plan that the government will adopt is one of elimination and zero tolerance towards it, so that we don't have to keep yo-yoing between alert levels, and we can gradually proceed down the alert level to 1. Now, that was the first question. The second question was around PPE being made widespread when we transition into out of alert level 4 and 3. Yeah. So now, to date, the advice, as I've said previously, the government's decisions have been purely based on the expert health advice that Cabinet and the Prime Minister has been getting. The advices that she has are connected globally to a network of science advisors as well. So we've got, they've got a very good overview of what's considered best technology overseas as well. PPE so far, and acknowledging that this could change, things change pretty quickly in this environment, but so far the advice that has been given is that PPE doesn't do a huge amount to stop the spread of the virus. So it also depends on the type of masks that are used, because the fact that this virus is carried through particles, generally when you sneeze and you cough and so on and so forth, through fluid, that can get through the pores of most of the masks that are available as well. So that's why there's been quite a bit of, if people jump on the Covid-19 website, there's a whole table there that outlines what kind of PPE, and also acknowledging that PPE is not just masks, it goes further than that, but the kind or the level of PPE that is needed in various sectors and depending on people's occupations as well. So from what I've read and from what I've heard and understand, generally the wearing of masks gives people some psychological relief. And also, I think if you have symptoms, it's helpful because it also reminds you of, coughing, sneezing etiquette, and things like that. So my understanding is that it's helpful if you're symptomatic, otherwise not really.
No. Thank you very much. And whoever is watching us, especially like Umar Khan, Tarun Singh, Kesar Rashid, Tokir Khan, Gurpreet Singh, definitely will ask your questions, but I hope that all of your questions will be, we have already chose a lot of questions which you are asking, and we will ask these questions. And if your question is not answered, we will request Priyanka to actually stay behind for another 5 minutes and answer these questions, if you don't mind. Because there's a lot of people asking their specific questions, and we have actually tried to cover these specific questions under the generic questions, which we will ask in coming next hour. So hopefully they will get answers to these questions. If not, you are more than welcome to actually leave your questions there, and my team, and Priyanka will answer your question as much as possible.
I'm also also happy to jump online and answer questions afterwards. I can just see one from Tarun Singh that I thought I'll just quickly respond to, and that's about wives of New Zealand citizens who are on visitors' visas and stuff overseas. That's an issue that I've had a fair bit to do with of late, and had conversations with the immigration minister about as well. I would just request those people who are in that situation to go to the Immigration New Zealand website, because there is a travel ban exception for partners of New Zealand citizens. And regardless of what their, the partner or the spouse's visa status is, they can apply through the Immigration New Zealand website for an exception to be able to travel to New Zealand, although the borders are shut, What I will say, though, is that having supported a few people through that process, it needs to be people who generally live in New Zealand. So
Mm.
I've had cases of people who have had a culturally arranged marriage and are wanting their spouse to come to New Zealand for the first time. From what I've seen, that's usually not successful because this process is quite strict. And it's strict because we need to maintain the integrity of our borders. So we need
Absolutely.
to limit the number of people who come through. But if it's someone who generally lives here, their husband or wife is a New Zealand citizen and in New Zealand, please go to the Immigration New Zealand website and look up the details for the travel ban exception. And if you qualify, apply through there.
Yes, unfortunately, Gurpreet, there are few rules and regulations which they have to follow. Unfortunately, few of the people are not getting exemptions or exceptions. But if, as Priyanka said, if you were living in New Zealand before this COVID-19, there are chances that you will get these exceptions or
Yeah.
exemptions.
And in saying that, I don't make those decisions. Just
Yeah.
relaying the information there. It is very, very strict because international travel still poses the greatest risk to the spread of COVID here in New Zealand.
And we, as a community leader like Pakistan Association of New Zealand and Priyanka, can only lobby the relationship and try to influence these decisions. But obviously, the decisions are made, as Priyanka said earlier, that it is made in terms of international rules and regulations to be considered. And they are working very closely with other governments as well, or other health and safety institutions. So the next question, though, the generally, if you see, I have actually, there's an air that everybody is very proud of Labour government. Everybody is very happy with how Jacinda uh, has worked on during this COVID-19 pandemic. There are few and far criticism as well, especially where people are actually comparing New Zealand with Australia, where Australia didn't go to level 4, but they actually maintained to level 3, or you can say level 3.5. Could we have not done the same as Australians have done?
Um, we need to understand that governments take decisions based on the context of the country that they govern. And so what I'll say is that the contexts are quite different between Australia and New Zealand. I'm comfortable with the decisions that our government has made. It's difficult to speculate in this situation because we could sort of now, with hindsight, because we've done so well, it's tempting to now look back and say, oh, maybe if we hadn't, gone so hard and so early and made the decisions that we did to go into a complete lockdown, maybe we could have saved people and saved the economy. That is actually, I think that's a false dichotomy, firstly, because you need to protect your people first in order to protect your economy. The minute your employers and your employees die, there is no economy.
Yeah.
So tempting as it is to look back and say, what if we had done something different? Maybe, we could have had a slightly easier 4 weeks and also protected our economy. I don't believe we could have done that.
Yeah.
And I believe strongly that we are and we have been as successful as we've been because of the measures that we took at the start.
Yeah, the other thing is that they're comparing people's life with percentage. So the percentage, obviously, they convert a person into a percentage that, see, the New Zealand has the similar percentage as Australian, but obviously the number of lives lost is a huge difference.
That's
Okay.
right.
Though you have answered this question earlier, but some people have joined us now, and I would like to people who have joined us now, please share this stream on your Facebook and on other pages as well, regardless of any ethnic community, any religion or anything. Please share this because it is very important information which we are going to relay in next half an hour. So my question is again on the businesses. Many ethnic community members are entrepreneurs and run small businesses. Will there be any government subsidy or assistance for SME businesses in coming 6 months or soon?
There already has been. So as you pointed out, we, I think, traversed this at the start of the video, but just
Yes.
to recap, the government's economic response package was one of the first things that the government did once COVID was confirmed here. A large part of that was the wage subsidy scheme, which was specifically to try and maintain the connection between businesses. When it started, it was particularly for SMEs, small, medium enterprises, to keep that connection between the employer and the employee, knowing that if we went into lockdown, as we did for 4 weeks, there would need to be a little bit of support for businesses to be able to pay their employees and hang on to them, so that when business picked up again and we transitioned out of the levels, the employees were there to pick the business back up along with the employers. So that was one aspect of it. The other, of course, was to ensure that workers got some income over this period of time. So that was part of, I think, to date, the government has rolled out about $10.4 billion that has gone to support, off the top of my head, 1.6 million New Zealanders. So that's been taken up. It is a high trust model, and it was put in place specifically to be so that money could be given out to employers quickly and in a way that was easy for them to access. You'll know that in many countries that have announced a similar sort of scheme, people are still waiting to get that money in their banks, whereas here it was rolled out at the start of the process of dealing with COVID, and it was made such that it was paid into people's accounts generally, and I've heard that this is true, generally within 5 working days. So that's one huge part of it to support businesses. Of course, the cap was removed, so it wasn't limited to small and medium businesses. Larger ones could apply as well. And then, of course, the Business Finance Guarantee Scheme, which was basically the Reserve banks here in New Zealand and the government coming together to provide companies who needed some bridging finance, for example, with that. And so that was companies with a turnover of between, I think it's 250,000 to 80 million who could apply for that. And it's 80% guaranteed by the government. Application, of course, is through banks for that. And then tools on the business, government website to help give small businesses a little bit of guidance through this period and beyond. That's the Kiwi Business Boost tool. If people need a little bit of guidance, a little bit of help in terms of what's out there and how to navigate it, they should jump on the business.govt.nz website and look at that. And then wider protections for renters and tenants, the mortgage repayment deferral scheme that, indirectly helps business owners as well. And of course, the whole health, the health focus of protecting people's health, I think, is the number one way to protect our businesses and their workers.
Brilliant. So it means that there is a support available from the government for all walks of life if you are affected with the coronavirus. Like if you come from business, you're a worker, you are a farmer, wherever you are, you have effect of coronavirus on you, you have the assistance available.
And also just to point out that the wage subsidy scheme can cover migrant workers as well. Many people don't realize this. It can, but it's up to the employer to apply for it to cover their migrant workers too.
Can you explain this? Because this is a kind of a confusion that people who are on a work visa was working before COVID-19, their employer could have applied for their wage subsidy. But if they didn't have applied for the wage subsidy, can these workers go to the court or somebody to actually complain against them?
That's a little bit difficult because it needs to be a conversation that they have with their employer, because technically it's not against the law not to apply, but it's the right thing to do. And many businesses have done that as well to maintain that connection with their workers who are on a work permit also. But anything else, so if the employer, for example, is not passing on the wage subsidy to the employees, that came up as an issue. And of course, there is a list that is published of the names of employers who have taken the wage subsidy and therefore should be passing it on to their employees. So people can check that list. If they know that an employer hasn't passed on the wage subsidy to employees, they can report that business to the Labour Inspectorate, and that number's on the MB website as well. There's also a tool that the Council of Trade Unions has developed called Together, and you'll find it on the website www.together.org.New Zealand, and that is a tool that the Council of Trade Unions has put together to keep a log of employers who have acted outside of employment law. And this is the other thing that people obviously don't realize, that, even though we're in this time of COVID-19, employment law still exists and still has to be adhered to. So you can't just fire somebody, for example. You need to still work within their contract and within the law. And the other thing is that trade unions have been doing a huge amount of work supporting workers during this time. So that's a bit of a plug for those who might not have joined a union to do so.
Yeah. Though we have a lot of questions, and in the second half of the interview, we will talk about stranded Pakistanis and stranded Kiwis in other parts of the world. There are few questions which I would like to take from the comment section. Frederick David, Sandrew Kapoor, Gurpreet Singh have a similar question about discrimination. Why there is a discrimination between onshore workers and gone on annual offshore workers? They have extended visas of onshore but haven't done offshore workers. So it's like somebody who was working here but have gone on holidays to Pakistan or India, but they're not getting the wage subsidy. Are they legally allowed to have wage subsidy?
They are. So their employers can apply for the wage subsidy to cover them. And as people will know, that is for a period of 12 weeks.
Sandhu is saying there's no any kind of support for offshore migrants. I'm not sure what does she mean by that. I think it's,
I am aware of this, and it is something that I've raised with relevant ministers as well. I do feel for those who are on temporary visas, both work visas and international students, who are now stranded overseas because the borders have shut, often both here and in the country that they are stranded in. Many are paying rents still here. They've got their lives here, their cars, many have loans and so on and so forth. I do feel for them. But at this point, the borders are shut. So if they have a critical reason to come back here and avail of the supports that are available in New Zealand, then the travel ban exception is the way to go. But as I've said before, that is very strict because, we need to do this from a health perspective. Unfortunately, there is minimal support at this point for migrant workers who are overseas.
Right.
Other than the wage subsidy.
Yeah, while we're talking about unemployment, and there are speculations and predictions that unemployment will hit up to 26% in next 2-3 months or 4 months. Do you think that the government is ready to or have a strategy to tackle this 26%? This is a huge unemployment. And do they have funds where they have already spent $10 billion? And where will they bring the funds for the next 6-8 months, where people, out of every 100, there's 25, 26 people who are not working?
Yeah. So the figure of 26, though, is only one scenario. So Treasury released a few different scenarios, I think ranging from 11% upwards. And so there are a few different scenarios, and they're based on the amount of support that government puts in as well. So there has been already, as we've already discussed, a fair bit of support that has gone in. The finance minister has said right at the start of this process that, the government will do all they can to support viable businesses, but it won't be possible to support every business. Some will fail. And that means some people will, unemployment is going to rise. That's going to happen globally. It's not just here in New Zealand, but it has to be dealt with. That is something that Cabinet is well aware of and has been working on for the past many weeks as well. So people will see support packages and plans that Treasury, Finance Minister and Cabinet more broadly will be putting out in subsequent weeks. That is an issue. But equally, and I want to take the opportunity to make this point here, equally, we will see people who have to avail of the benefit system. The fact that New Zealand is a welfare state and more money has been put into benefits as well, from the viewpoint that this will happen. People who lose their jobs will go on a job seeker benefit. And often I'm asked, particularly sadly within our communities, many of us don't come from countries that are welfare states. And so there seems to be sometimes in some pockets of our communities, a lack of understanding or a slightly different view of those who are on benefits. And I think this is an opportunity for people to realize how something outside of your control can mean that you have to, get some help through the benefit system, and there should be no stigma. to that. So that is unfortunately what will happen. We have seen benefits rise, or the uptake of benefits rise. It hasn't been as sharp an incline as we've seen in some other countries as well. And I think the wage subsidy has been helping, because that helps to bridge that gap and keep people in employment. And that, of course, is what the government will be looking to support as much as possible.
Thank you very much. We have another 20-25 minutes, and the last section of the this program is exclusively talking about the repatriation, stranded people or ethnic communities in different parts of the world. So, as you know, there are very large number of New Zealanders with ethnic origins stranded overseas. They are facing severe implications like job losses. What is being done about them till to date?
Yeah, so the largest group that I've been working with, in a sense, has been the group of Kiwis stranded in India. And initially, the information that we had through the government had through Safe Travel was that there were, I think, about 800 that were stranded there. There's been quite a push to ensure that, through social media and word of mouth and so on and so forth, that Kiwis stranded there should jump on Safe Travel New Zealand and register. And everyone, all New Zealanders who are stranded anywhere in the world, should be registering on Safe Travel New Zealand. One point I'll make there is, in my conversations with people stranded overseas, I've realized that some have actually registered on Safe Travel when they first went to the country that they are visiting. And since then, the dates have lapsed. So, if someone has moved or gone on a holiday on March 2nd to India and registered then, they were planning to travel out on, say, the 25th and couldn't do so. If they don't update their details on Safe Travel, the system kicks them out, and they're not considered current on the system. And if that happens, MFAT doesn't realize that they're still stuck in that country. So one of the things that I will say is, to those who have registered on Safe Travel, jump back on. If you haven't been getting emails from MFAT, go and update your details on the Safe Travel News. That is incredibly important. I can't stress that enough, because that is how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade gets their information as to which New Zealander is where, and they get numbers of where people are. So now I understand from MFAT that the number of Kiwis stranded in India has risen to, I think, close to 1,500. Is the information that they have received. And so I was contacted by some of them. It's been a few weeks now, so I'm kind of forgetting what happened. But anyway, I was contacted by them, told that there's a large group of New Zealanders stuck in India. Can there be repatriation flights? I raised that with the Prime Minister directly, and she said that she would look into it, which she did. It sits within the purview of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and MFAT officials, and so they've been working on it for quite a few weeks now, actually, because people need to realize that the times we're in means that organizing these flights is incredibly difficult.
Yes.
And it's particularly complex from a country like India, which is large and is undergoing their own lockdown as well. And of course, Kiwis weren't just conveniently in one state, they spread across the country. And so trying to organize a flight that will help as many as possible to get out from there has been an incredibly complex process. But of course, the first flight has already come back from Delhi, from memory. So there are a subsequent 2 more flights that have already been confirmed from Delhi and Mumbai. But then, of course, there's the issue of those in the southern states. And so I've heard from many of them who are stuck in cities like Cochin, Chennai, and so on and so forth. And so now MFAT's aware of that. And they are working with airlines and partners to try and work out some flight options for those who are in the southern part of India and the eastern part, who haven't been able to get out. So unfortunately, given the times we're in, it's going to take, it takes a little bit of time to organize. Also because many of the countries that we ordinarily transit through have shut their borders to even transit flights. So all of that needs to be worked out by MFAT officials, who are working incredibly hard to get this done.
We must admire and congratulate your efforts of helping people and repatriating them from obviously at a very difficult time. So then my next question is, we are in touch with stranded New Zealanders from Pakistani origin, and they're extremely worried and vulnerable from where they are. They did not have satisfactory response from the government functions as embassies and MFAT. Is MFAT doing anything about it? Like,
Oh, look,
let me.
I'll have to look into that. The only person of Pakistani origin who contacted me indirectly was actually on a temporary visa, not a New Zealander. So this isn't an issue that has been raised with me before, frankly. But it's one that I'm happy to look into. At the end of the day, MFAT has some considerations that they put into place in
Yeah.
terms of where repatriation flights will be undertaken from. But it's a conversation that I can have with them to look into whether there's anything in train for Kiwis who are stranded in Pakistan,
Yeah.
and see if there's anything possible. But they should also be registering with Safe Travel New Zealand. I'd also be interested to find out what you've mentioned that they've said that the response was not satisfactory. I'd be
Yeah.
keen to know what that response was.
Okay.
Also bearing in mind that we don't have a mission in Pakistan. The nearest High Commission is in Iran,
In Iran, yes.
or
So just
rather,
to give,
a High
yeah,
Commission that has
yeah, just
has.
to give you the background, there are approximately 51 citizens or residents in Pakistan in different parts of Pakistan, like Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad. Karachi is the
Mhm.
strictest area where there are no flights, but there are a few flights which are coming out of Lahore. And there was recently some flights where MFAT have actually asked them to take flights through Australia. And they were asked to actually apply for the exemptions of the transit visa as well as exemption for the quarantine. So the issue is the people who are actually stranded in Karachi, they can't travel to Lahore. It's quite a
So,
big distance.
so you're saying from Lahore there are commercial flights though?
There was a chartered flight actually from Pakistan International Airlines. There were few Qatar Airways have actually run some flights from Lahore as well, but
Hmm.
unfortunately they are coming through Australia. So just a recommendation that one of the guy actually wrote me. He said one recommendation from MFAD that went out to these Kiwis was to take the Qatar Airways flight into Australia and then make their way to NZ. This required getting transit visa, exemption to travel to NZ via Aussie, and exemption from mandatory quarantine. The flight schedule is such that they will need to spend at least 2 nights in Australia before they can fly to NZ. For
Right.
these 2 nights, the Ministry of Health Australia is not willing to grant them an exemption. Though they are giving them the exemption for the transit, but obviously there's 2 days of delay for actually catching a flight from Oz to here. So they
Mm.
have to go under the quarantine. And the situation is such that one of the guy who has 3 passports, but the mother, the wife doesn't have the passport, and she's a permanent resident and have an infant. So they are now thinking of leaving the infant and the mother behind and then traveling here. So these are the few stories which are obviously coming out of these stranded Pakistanis. So yes, MFAT is in contact with most of these people, but unfortunately they are not providing enough support or influencing the New Zealand government to actually exempt the quarantine for 14 days in Aussie. They have provided them the transit visas, but not
Mm.
the exemption from the
Yeah,
quarantine.
sure. And that isn't something the New Zealand government can do because that sits with the Australian government, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But let me have a chat with MFAT and see if there's anything I can find out in the space. But if MFAT's already been in touch with those who are there, yeah, that's a process that's already happening. But let me
mm,
see if there's anything further that can be done,
yeah.
and
There's
I'll have
another
a chat with you
suggestion.
offline.
No worries. And thank you very much. And I hope that I will obviously follow up on this with you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and there is another suggestion from another stranded Pakistani. He said that if we can meet in the middle ground, that if we fly from Pakistan to maybe Singapore or Malaysia, and then Air New Zealand can actually take us from Singapore or New Zealand or Malaysia, so that we do not have to go through Aussie and do not have to go quarantine.
I don't think transiting through Singapore is an option, actually. But look, I'm not best placed to advise on specific routes, and there are so many complexities with transit facilities, or the option of actually being able to transit through different countries at this point. It's not normal times, and so I appreciate people's suggestions, but MFAT is best placed to know where flights can actually transit through, and what some of the requirements are to be able to do that as well. So happy to have the conversation with you offline, but right now I wouldn't be able to provide any advice on specific transit routes.
Okay, and the other thing is that MFAT only have allowed 3 days to actually get the itinerary or the ticket, then get the exemptions, get your backpack, and reach to the from Karachi to obviously to Lahore, where there these Qatar Airways flights are coming. Is there any? Do you know when the border is opening? Like when do you think that New Zealand will open the borders?
I wouldn't know that at this point, unfortunately. I suspect not an alert level 3 either. But as I said before, international travel still poses one of the biggest risks for us in terms of the spread of COVID-19 here in New Zealand. So we would want to be extremely careful before the borders reopen.
So, in terms of the standard Pakistanis, what will be your key notes from here, or what will be the key steps you will take after today or since tomorrow, from tomorrow?
Look, I'll have a chat with my contact in MFAT and see what is happening in that space. Obviously, they are aware because you've mentioned that Kiwi stranded there have been in touch with MFAT, and there have been some conversations. They just haven't been satisfactory. So I will find out from MFAT's end what those conversations have been and what the barriers may be with that, and then take it from there.
Okay, just to give you a little bit of more background, that being the representative organization of these Pakistani stranded, we have actually wrote letters to different organization heads, like not to the MPs, but MFAT head, like New Zealand head, and so on. So we will provide you the communication, whatever the communication we have made with these institutes, so that you know what the groundwork we have actually already laid on that.
Sure, that would be wonderful. And I'm happy to continue working with you as the representative organization as well.
Thank you very much. And we're looking forward to that. Another very touching question. Many people are asking why the tickets are so expensive. $5,500 from flying from India, and that was a another direct flight. So why 55?
Yeah. So once again, I'll go back to the fact that these aren't normal times that we're in. These are incredibly difficult times, and that holds true for those who are navigating, negotiating, and organizing these flights, and everything that's involved, from the ground transportation that's needed, transporting people from where they are to the airport to be able to access these flights, and all of that. So a huge amount of cost that's involved. The second thing that I will say is that the cost has been based on a global network that MFAT has worked out. So it doesn't matter where you're flying from. Chances are the cost is going to be around that ballpark figure. The other thing that I'll emphasize as well is that the cost is being, the charges are on a cost recovery basis, which means it doesn't go anywhere close to covering the actual cost of the flights. So these are the prices. It is a lot of money. I'll absolutely acknowledge that. It is a lot of money, especially when there are multiple people traveling from one family as well. But these are already highly subsidized by the New Zealand taxpayer. So that's. So I'll leave it at that.
I understand that. Will there be any installments for the people who won't be able to pay?
Yeah, so there is an option for those who can't afford to pay upfront to sign what is called an undertaking with MFAT, which means that they will then work out within a month of coming back to New Zealand. They'll work out a payment plan that in a way that they can pay that's comfortable for them as well. So there is that.
Thank you very much. We are heading towards the end, and I must say that it is by far the most informative program I have done in last 4 weeks, and obviously the audience is also very engaging. They are asking lots of questions. So I'll ask. I have 3-4 questions, but I'll reduce it to one question, the last and final question, and then we will actually quickly go through the comment section and see if you can see the questions. I would like you to answer a few of the questions yourself, whatever you think is suitable. So the last question from my side is, what are some of the permanent changes in the ways we live, do business and operate our lives in this pandemic would leave us with? Like, what will be the permanent changes we will have to adopt in future run?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's strange times that we're living in. It's difficult for many. Many are struggling to get through this period. And also the uncertainty. And I think particularly for us, in migrant communities, many of us have close family and friends, particularly family, that are still in different countries. So there's a huge amount of anxiety that people are going through, not being able to go to where their family members are. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. It is difficult for many. But I do think that things have so much has changed. I mean, in 2 months back, if people had said that we'll be in lockdown for COVID-19, none of that in that sentence would make sense to any of us. But things have moved on so much. There's so much more of a reliance on technology. I mean, for those of us in Parliament, for example, caucus meetings that I have with the minister as her private secretary, all of them continue. Select committees are continuing all via video technology. So I think already the way in which we're doing things has changed. We've realized that we can actually connect in a different way. And I think that will be one. The fact that we are all so globally and domestically connected, the fact that something that happens in one part of the world can affect us hugely, I think that has become, people are a lot more aware of just how connected we are across the world. The point that I made earlier about the welfare state as well, I think is important. So I think we will do things differently. Lots of businesses are looking at how they can go online and change the way in which they work as well. So I think there'll be those differences. There's also, I think, growing awareness of the importance of the infrastructure we have. So you'll know that when the coalition government took office, one of the main things we said was the need to invest in housing, the need to invest in social and public housing, the health system, the education sector. And that's where a lot of our emphasis has gone, is to strengthen those sectors. And I think we see really clearly in the COVID-19 situation just how important it is to have a well-functioning health system, to make sure that people who are homeless have homes, because something like this affects everyone and in turn affects everyone else as well, So the importance of those things, digital platforms, children being able to access digital platforms to learn, to do business, contactless commerce. So I think there's a huge amount of change that will come out of this. And then, of course, things like, for me, this is the longest amount of time I've spent at home in years, and that'll be the same for many people. And a lot of what I'm hearing and seeing on social media is that people are cooking, and eating better, that they're going out and exercising a lot more, that connection with family is strengthened, family and even friends via Zoom as well. And that importance of looking after one's physical and mental health in connection with family. So I think those things, and looking after the environment, I think those things will hopefully strengthen post-COVID as well. So lots of negatives, obviously. The economic impact will be devastating. It's going to be the worst since the Great Depression. But out of that also, I think some positives that will, likely come out of it.
Thank you very much. And there are questions on your right hand. If you would like to answer, there's a lot of people asking about offshore migrants. I'm not sure what they're meaning to that. If you can answer to that question, I think, can offshore migrants expect any type of help from NZ government? It has been a long time. That's from Sun.
Yeah, I'm wondering, a little bit more clarity about the type of support that they are. A lot of what I've been asked about is for them to come back to New Zealand, for the borders to open. And again, for those who have a critical need to come back, there is a mechanism in place, the travel ban exception on the Immigration New Zealand website. But in terms of the borders reopening to those on temporary visas, unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment. And that will have to be dealt with incredibly carefully based on the expert advice of health advisors, basically. Again, because that is a huge risk. Reopening borders is a huge risk in terms of the spread of COVID here. So that's not something I would advocate for, frankly, now. But in terms of other support, if there are specific issues that people are facing overseas, some clarity around that would be
Immigration, yeah. Gurpreet is asking another question. Visa extensions for all offshore migrants or the people whose visas are expiring soon. Is there any policy came from the
Yeah,
government?
I have actually queried that with Immigration New Zealand, and I'm waiting to get some advice from Immigration New Zealand on that. So what I can do is then share it with Pens, so that you can maybe put it on as a response later on.
No worries. We have actually wrote to Ian as well, and I hope that you lobby for us on behalf of Pakistan Association that how we are doing a good work to provide the right information to the communities without any religion, caste, creed, anything. So I hope that
Absolutely.
he will be. It will be a good platform for him to join and give the latest updates. Thank you very much.
Sure.
We are almost 9 o'clock, though it is such a lovely program and it is so informative that I would like to carry on and continue. There's a lot of discussions we can make, but obviously there's limitation of time. There are people who would like to go away as well. So in the end, on behalf of Pakistan Association of New Zealand, thank you very much that you have given us such an important time and you have answered so many questions and then you are taking the
Again.
recommendation on behalf of Pakistan Association for working for Pakistani standards in Pakistan or the Kiwi standards in Pakistan.
Yes, no, absolutely. And thank you, Asim, once again for having me on the show. Thank you also to the Pakistani Association of New Zealand, to you, Naveed, Hamid, and your whole team that's been leading the excellent work that you've been doing, both throughout this period of COVID-19, but of course, much beyond that as well. So huge thank you to you. Thank you also to everyone who's watching, who has been staying home and saving lives by doing that. Those from our communities who have been on the front lines. Many of our organizations have been going that extra mile to support those, individuals and families who need a little bit of extra support during this time. We're all, at the end of the day, part of the same community. And so we all have, the government has a role to play, but equally all of us as individuals do as well. And I know that you are doing that. So a huge thank you to all of you for doing that. And of course, as we're in the month of Ramadan, best wishes to everyone who is celebrating Ramadan for a very blessed month.
Thank you very much, Priyanka, and we will definitely have you soon back with us. This program, we are planning to continue this program, though we will reduce the intensity. We used to do 3 days a week, but we are planning to reduce it to 2 or 1, depending on the number of people joining us in next few weeks. Obviously, it is a Ramadan month, and many people are busy praying uh, and eating and celebrating the Ramadan. So let's see how it pans out in next 2 to 3 weeks. And yes, the leadership makes a lot of difference, and you can see that how Jacinda's leadership has made a difference in New Zealand. We can say proudly that we are if not the first, but the second safest country in the world. Whenever I've been interviewed back home in Pakistan and interviewed by different media groups in around the globe, and they always ask me how Jacinda has managed to do it, and I always say that it is the charismatic personality she has, and if he asks us to do anything, we close our eyes and we do it, and we do it together. So have a very lovely day and a very lovely night to you guys, and I hope that you will join us back on Wednesday. As I said, that we will be reducing the intensity of the program. So next program, instead of Tuesday, we will be doing it Wednesday, and there will be only 2 programs, Wednesday and Sunday, same time, 8 o'clock. We will bring another important informative talk show to you. I hope you have got a lot of information from this program. If you still have some questions, you're happy to leave these comments, your comments or your suggestions in this under this video. And please, before leaving, share this video, because it has answers to many of the fellow Kiwis, so they can get benefit out of this show instead of asking the questions and not getting the answers. And yes, the government is working to assist with the business community as well. Very good night and see you soon.